Once upon a time. Welcome to Australian Book Lovers, your destination for imagination.
A big warm welcome to everyone and a huge thank you for joining us for the Australian Book Lovers podcast. Our mission is to bring fabulous Australian and Indigenous literature that spans a whole range of genres to book lovers around the globe, as well as fantastic resources and information for passionate authors looking to write their next bestseller. I'm Veronica Strachan, fantasy, memoir and picture book writer, voracious reader, and one of your co-founders and hosts for today's episode.
And I am Darren Kesenko, science fiction and horror author, avid reader, lover of all things literature, but also one of your co-founders and co-hosts of today's edition of the Australian Book Lovers podcast, which I, correct me if I'm wrong, Veronica, number 27.
Indeed, number 27. And
another spectacular industry episode.
Yes. And I'm coming to you today from Wurundjeri country, Woiwurrung language mob out where I am, and you're in the usual place, Darren?
I am coming from Corner Country, absolutely. Excellent. And at the time of recording, I think prior to hitting the red button, we were just discussing about being at an interlude with a little bit of sunshine before Mother Nature will come through and possibly bring a lot of rain and remind us that winter is still here. Indeed.
They will be bringing us cold fronts and horrible things, but we're okay with that because that's Australia and we just cope with whatever comes.
That's it. And I don't know about what the Victorians call it, but here I like to think of those horrific weather events, not horrific, but those spectacular weather events that come off the coast and chill the bone as kisses from Antarctica.
Kisses from Antarctica. I like that. That is really nice.
Yeah, embrace it. The freshest wind you'll get. I know it stings. I know it makes your lips numb, but it's so good for you.
There you go. Well, I must say that there's been an interesting little chat on Twitter just recently, and the difference between mainlanders and Taswegians. And I'm saying that from Madeline Dest, one of our co-authors in Christmas Australis.
Yes.
A frighteningly festive anthology of spine-jingling tales. So that's pretty good that I still remember that. But one of the other authors, which was Kate, who her Twitter handle is at Dialeaf Hall. She's one of our fabulous middle grade authors. She wondered what people called these little spiky plants. And she said, mainlanders, do you folks have buzzies? Or if you do you call them something different? You know what I mean if I say buzzies or bidgy-widgies? So as a South Australian, do you know what a buzzy or a bidgy-widgie is?
No, I can only think maybe three-corner jack. Are we talking about the things that punch through the super strength thongs and still get into your feet?
Could be. A three-corner jack could be. Well, here's your challenge, is to look it up and tell us in the next episode. So Helen, who is from South Australia, said we just call them bindies or prickles. And I said, bindies for us in regional Vic. But Madeline said she can speak both mainland and Taswegian. Buzzies are different to bindies. Both are annoying. One hurts more. So yes, it was a little bit of what? So Madeline put some pictures up, as did Kate. So yeah, just working out those things that are slightly different.
Yeah,
we talk about between states. So yeah,
absolutely, and that just the contrast we have across this great nation is spectacular. But
indeed,
I think by the description that you so eloquently gave them, I will be equally eloquent, should I say, and say that I think the difference here in South Australia between the two is, one, you will walk, and when you get to your destination, you have to pull off your thong and pull off 30 of these little spike things.
Yeah.
Whereas if you hit a three-corner jack, you stop where you are, take it out, and realise you're in trouble because there may be more, and you're in the middle of a park or somewhere, and you are not prepared.
Yes. Yeah. Look, I think you've got it, because what you're saying is three-corner jack. I think of the ones that the dogs get in there when they run in the long grass. They come back and straight in their paws. Yeah. All right.
But
However,
there we go. The important stuff is, well, no, that wasn't the important stuff, but that was the fun stuff. But the important stuff is the fantastic guest that we are about to introduce to our listeners. And this was a real special one, definitely.
It was. So we spoke with Olivia Lanchester, who is the CEO of the Australian Society of Authors. Now, I know our listeners would have heard me speak about bits and pieces that the ASA have done before. And it was fantastic to talk to Olivia about the history of the organisation, about the advocacy, support and advice that the ASA provide. And Olivia is ideally placed. So she's worked as a senior intellectual property lawyer in private practice and as a freelance editor. So what a fantastic combination to become the CEO of the Australian Society of Authors, which is all about supporting both authors and illustrators around Australia. And they advocate for, for pay rates. They help people with contracts. They look at all of the areas of publishing where what are substantially, sole business owners need professional support and advice around lots of different stuff, legal, process, finance, all those kind of things. So very helpful. And it was lovely to chat with her. And as always, we meet these people who are just, you could say they're merely a part of the publishing industry in Australia, but so passionate about what they do, so committed to bringing a better product to readers and supporting creators to be sustainable and to be in a substantial business. So yeah, fantastic. It was a really great chat.
Yeah, I don't think you could have put it better. And absolutely, as far as for someone to be in that position, we couldn't have asked for a better resume as far as for the Australian Society of Authors. Not to mention, couldn't have asked for a more spectacularly beautiful personality either.
Yes,
and with so much passion. But all these industry interviews that we're so lucky to be able to be a part of and to do is really a celebration of the supreme crystal gold standard of passion and intelligence and just great people leading our arts here in Australia. And I don't think that's spotlighted or highlighted enough. I think, we don't often have chance to celebrate or reason to celebrate all those aspects of Australian arts that are so important. And this one's a really important one because boy, did I wish I knew about the Australian Society of Authors starting way back in the day. Because
me too.
If I had been able to use all the tools or at least some of the tools, as I sort of tried to, build a life as a writer or even a hobby as a writer, it would have made such a huge difference. And I'm so glad that doing this podcast has allowed us to discover what a wonderful, treasure chest of advice and practical tools and inspiration that the Australian Society of Authors represents. And, to all our listeners out there, if you haven't heard of it, please do, listen to the podcast, of course, listen to the fantastic interview, but definitely look up the website because I think you're going to be astounded by what you'll find. And then to discover just the hard work that is going on behind the scenes to empower all writers and artists out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so much of it is provided free. They've got some fabulous frequently asked questions, which is brilliant, about publishing industry, copyright, contracts, manuscripts, and about earning a living and rates of pay. But if you do decide to take up a membership, then there's a stack more things there for you to, reap the benefits of.
Well, I guess the best thing to do to discover what those benefits are is listen to Olivia herself because she gave some amazing insights and so much knowledge. And it was just a wonderful interview to be a part of, wasn't it? So I think thank you everybody for joining us for another awesome industry special podcast. And it is our absolute pleasure to introduce to you the wonderful Olivia from the Australian Society of Authors.
Lovely. Let's go. And welcome listeners to another Australian Book Lovers Industry Expert podcast. We have with us the CEO of the Australian Society of Authors, Olivia Lanchester. Welcome, Olivia.
Thanks for having me, Veronica.
Olivia, we usually ask our guests where they are coming from in terms of traditional custodians. So I'm coming to you today from the land of the Wurundjeri people, Woiwurrung Nation, Kulin Nation, out where I am in Victoria, and my co-host.
That's me, Darren Kazanko, and I'm coming to you today from Corner Country in South Australia.
And I'm joining you from Gadigal land, the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here in Sydney.
Fantastic. It is so good to see more and more emphasis coming out into the acceptance of the traditional owners, the unceded land, which is fantastic. Olivia, tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would.
Well, I've been at the ASA for many years now, over
Right.
5 years,
Mm-hmm.
but have just taken up the role of CEO at the beginning of last year, which was a really interesting and challenging year to begin that new position.
Yes.
In a former life, before I kind of joined the wonderful world of books and the book industry, I used to work as an intellectual property lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
So my background is actually in IP law, which led me to an interest in copyright, and that is actually how I found my way towards the ASA in the first place. I was so interested in some of the copyright policy reform work being done at the ASA, the advocacy on behalf of authors.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my background. Since I have been at the ASA, I've worked in a variety of project roles, predominantly in the ASA's contract assessment service. So we run a service advising authors and illustrators on their publishing agreements or their literary agents agreements. And now in my current role, so I've really enjoyed learning about the publishing industry. It's a fascinating industry. I've always been an avid reader. I've always loved books like so many others who work with authors. So I enjoy it immensely.
Good. So the big change then from a project role or an interest, what have you seen as the biggest change for yourself stepping into that CEO role and company secretary, adding that? I know how much more that adds to your, your daily tasks.
Yeah, well, I'm so lucky, Veronica, because we have a great team at the ASA. So it actually runs so smoothly. We are a really small organisation. I think that our members are sometimes surprised that there are not more of us.
Right.
But yeah, there's only 5 of us here, and everyone here is delightful to work with. So it has been such a smooth transition. I really worked closely with my predecessor, the former CEO, Juliette Rogers, and that was great because I think that when I stepped into this role, I was really, really well prepared.
Yeah.
So it's been actually fantastic, really enjoyable.
Good. What's your favourite part of being the CEO? Because I see you're out on panels and, hey, on podcasts. Of course, I'm sure that was your favourite today. But what part of your role? Because you talked about the contracts and the intellectual property. I know you do a little bit of writing for the newsletter. What is the thing that gives you the most buzz, I guess, the most joy?
Oh, undoubtedly the interaction with the members. Writers, good writers, are deep thinkers, and they're fascinating people. I think we are lucky that we have a really engaged membership, and that's the best bit. It's actually hearing from the members, hearing about their success. It's so hard to get published.
Yes.
It's such a tough and fiercely competitive industry that the biggest reward, without doubt, is seeing the successes. That's what I think everyone who works here would say the same.
Yeah. And, well, I have to ask you then, do you have some secret dreams of writing yourself?
It's too hard, Veronica. No, look, I don't. And unusually, I mean, we have a tradition at the ASA of employing many, many authors.
You're right, yes.
But I think I am content to be a reader instead, and writers have my undying admiration.
Very good. No, good to hear. Very good. All right, Darren, I'm hogging the questions there.
I was going to say it's a cakewalk, I promise, Olivia. And editing is super fun. You should jump in and try it. No, I definitely have a few questions, and but first of all, thank you so much for being part of the program today. And I was quite astounded looking over the Australian Society of Authors website and just seeing all of the the features of the site and all the different services you offer. It's a fantastic site there, but I probably want to get down to quite a serious question in relation to writing in general and some of the services you offer, and that is, publishing speed dating. I saw that, and that looks absolutely fantastic. And I think it was the first time I've ever heard of it, and I'm probably confident saying a lot of our listeners out there may not have heard of it either. So I was wondering if you might be able to shed a little bit of light on how the speed dating works, what it entails, and has there been any, fantastic successes that has come from it?
Sure. Look, literary speed dating is fun and terrifying, just like dating in the real world, actually. It has become our flagship program. We've run it for years now. It was started by the wonderful Laureen Croasdale, who used to work at the ASA, and it's really taken off. We're now running literary speed dating 3 times a year and have great attendance by publishers and agents. And it's an opportunity for authors to pitch their work. We now completely run it online, so via Zoom. So you have 3 minutes to pitch your work to a publisher or to an agent. You book in advance, obviously, to those publishers or agents who are relevant to you and interested in your work. And then if the publisher at the end of your 3-minute pitch likes what they've heard, they'll let us know at the ASA, and then we get in contact with the authors. And in fact, our last literary speed dating event, we had 45% interest rate from publishers.
That's fantastic.
That's incredible.
It is great, isn't it? I mean, it's not to say that those 45% of people will go on to get a publishing offer, but there was 45% who were asked to provide the full manuscript to the publisher, that the publisher was interested and wanted to see more and wanted to see the manuscript. We have had some recent wonderful successes. For example, Philip Carson pitched his work at Literary Speed Dating, was picked up by Affirm Press, and his book, which is called The Modern Marriage, is being published, I think, at the end of August this year. So we've had some success over the years. That's one of the most recent examples. I think what's great about literary speed dating is there are very, very few opportunities to get in front of a publisher. And we all know that it's difficult to get noticed and time consuming. If you send your manuscript in unsolicited, it can take a long time to hear back from publishers. So this is a way to get in front of a publisher and hopefully shortcut that process.
Sounds good. And I know people talk about it a little bit on Twitter, the writing community there. And I must say, I have seen Philip's little pre-launch ad. So he's doing very well with his marketing, because I noticed, I was really interested in and watched his little video. So that was good.
Yes. It looks great, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does look good. So
it sounds so much fun, because it's like I guess like movie-wise, it's that elevator pitch. But for an author to try and, if you were going to be a part of something like speed dating, you're forced into condensing your tagline or your synopsis into 3 minutes, which is a huge task, really. But I think it's a fantastic opportunity to sort of whittle down and really get to the meat and bones of what your story is.
Look, absolutely, Darren. And I think as an author or a prospective author, you have to know that. You have to know your market. You have to know where your book would sit in the bookstore. You have to know your readership. You want to know maybe some comparable titles. You really want to know all of that up front, so that when you pitch to an author, you're making the most of every second. It's a fleeting opportunity, and you want to grab their attention. Before Literary Speed Dating, we run a course called Pitch Perfect, and that is always offered in advance of Literary Speed Dating as an opportunity for authors to prepare. It's really, really recommended to do that course. In fact, we've had publishers say to us that they reckon they can tell those authors who have attended Pitch Perfect, because they're ready to go. They've honed their pitch. And then from a publisher perspective, they get all the information they need up front, and then there's a tiny opportunity to ask questions as well. So if you were going to attend Literary Speed Dating, I'd really encourage any author, if you haven't already, to do Pitch Perfect first.
very good. Olivia, there is so much going on at ASA, but let's start perhaps with the history. So ASA says advocacy, support and advice. So how long has the organisation been around?
Since 1963.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
A fraction younger than me, so that's fantastic. And I've, matured with age, so I'm sure that ASA has as well. Tell us a little more.
Yeah, I think the ASA, particularly in recent years, is increasingly a broad church. It is set up to really welcome all authors, no matter what you write, and poets and historians and bloggers and journalists. If you write, then you are so welcome at the ASA. Or if you draw or paint, it's for illustrators as well. And the purpose of the ASA has always been to support authors and illustrators build a creative career and to help ensure that those careers can be sustainable. Yeah. It's really hard if you're an author. You work typically in isolation. Mm-hmm. And authors really rely on their personal networks, which is why they're so often in writing groups and members of, small, their own kind of maybe genre associations, but also to be part of something bigger. So the ASA exists to provide, I guess, a hub of information, education, resources, and that would include things that you see on our website, information, the FAQs, some resources that you can buy to help you, contract templates, all of that information. Then there's our recommended rates of pay, so that particularly if you're starting out and you have no idea what to charge when you're being asked to appear at a festival or where you're being, engaged to go to a school to conduct a school visit. So we've got our recommended rates of pay. And then we're here as well for advice. I mentioned before our contract assessment service, and we also just run an advice box where you can submit any question you might have about the publishing process. It strikes me that the publishing industry is very opaque when you are outside it.
Yes.
And
I'll just say yes. There's a world in that one.
Sorry, neither of you can see me just sitting and nodding, going.
Well, and I think there is this sort of perception that you need to know someone in the know, and where do you begin and how do you break in? And it is really, really difficult. So that's where we're here to try and demystify the whole publishing process and give some guidance and advice along the way. And then we have our mentorship program where you can be mentored by an experienced author or editor. And we also run a professional development program. So they are our workshops and interactive sessions that are now run completely online. Since COVID, everything is online.
Yes.
But that's great, actually, because it means anywhere, wherever you live in Australia, those courses are accessible to you. So that's the professional development program. And just the last thing about, what does the ASA do and why do we exist is advocacy. So I think that in my time at the ASA, it's only become increasingly cemented in my mind that we really do need a united voice for authors to government, to Canberra, but also within the industry as well. I think that authors have more power than they realise, but they're all individuals living across a big country, and actually the ability to advocate for authors as a group is incredibly important. And so, yeah, we see that as a real pillar of ours.
Yeah, and I would say absolutely, having come from a nursing background and where, our union association was so important, particularly through the 80s and those kind of things, with developing rates of pay and safety and ratios for care and all those kind of things. Individuals can't do it. And I would say, having come to the publishing industry later, that it is really disparate. People are on their own, banging away at their keyboards or writing, and to have a group who has the the best intentions, but also has an educated and articulate voice is critically important.
Yeah, I think so too. When you look at some of the big, successes in the history of the ASA, they've been really fundamental. One of the most obvious being PLR and ELR.
Yes. Please spell those out for our listeners. We know what they are, but I'd love to tell our listeners a little more about those.
Yes, look, if you're an author, you must know about PLR, ELR, Public Lending Right and Educational Lending Right. They are schemes run by the federal government to pay creators when their books are made available in public libraries or educational libraries like school, university, TAFE libraries. So the policy behind PLR, ELR is to compensate writers and illustrators and publishers and editors for royalties that are lost when your book is borrowed multiple times from a library. So of course, as an author, you want your book to be in libraries, and it's wonderful when libraries purchase books from publishers and then make those books available to the community. But if your book is borrowed again and again and again by library patrons, that is representative of some lost royalties back to the author. So that's why the scheme was initially set up back in 1975 for PLR and around 2000 for ELR. And the ASA at the moment is advocating for an expansion of those schemes because currently those schemes just apply to print books. So print books in libraries are covered. But if your book is made available in a library as an ebook or as an audiobook available by way of digital download, digital audiobook, then those formats are not covered by PLR, ELR payments. And we're really concerned about this because there has been an increase in ebook borrowing from libraries, particularly last year during COVID, when lots of libraries had to close their doors physically, but still continued their library services and still continued library loaning and saw a huge spike in ebook loans. So for all of those loans that were on digital formats last year, none of those will be considered in the PLR, ELR surveys, and no payments will flow. So we have been campaigning for several years now and in contact with the Office for the Arts, the federal government, about why we think those schemes should be expanded to cover digital formats, really to future-proof the schemes and to ensure that authors are not missing out, particularly if you have more, for instance, of your books available in digital format than in print format, which would be true for some authors. So that's one of our latest advocacy preoccupations, Veronica.
Yes, it's certainly worth pursuing. So thank you on the behalf of, all authors around the
Yes.
well, I was to say around the globe, but certainly around Australia for sure.
But it does bring up an interesting dilemma, I guess, or a predicament that needs to be sorted out at some point. But you mentioned, of course, audiobooks, and with regards to rights, it's because I know the music industry, you can be join the I can't remember the name of the organisation here, but as a musician, if you've released an album, then of course across across the world really, but across here in Australia, if you're playing any sort of music in public, you have to basically pay a licensing fee, and that licensing fee, I understand, is shared amongst those people that are members of that particular organisation. Or for example, on radio stations and whatnot. Where does an audiobook format fall? Can it be considered as in the same vein as, say, a musical recording, in which case to distribute it, for example, through a lending library, is there a way of incorporating that music side of things as well, or does it definitely fit, or is it 100% considered literary as opposed to, a broadcast?
Yeah, so audiobooks are available, they used to be available on CD format and now have moved to digital download. And the way authors would be paid for audiobooks is if a consumer purchases through Audible, for example, or wherever they buy their audiobook, there is a royalty that flows back to the author via the publisher. And then there are subscription services that are including audiobooks. And it's the same. It's a royalty which flows back to the author. I don't know that audiobooks are considered a broadcast in the same way. The analogy in the literary world, Darren, to the one that you've just drawn about the license for playing music publicly is probably copyright agency, which is our collecting society for the use of text and images. So if, for example, schools or government copy from books, then copyright agency collects license fees. And if you are a member of copyright agency, then those payments are then distributed back to authors. So if you're an author and you think that your books might be copied in schools, for example, absolutely, you must be a member of Copyright Agency. Go to their website and join. It's free and it's easy.
Wow.
Which I learned from looking at the FAQs on the ASA website under the fantastic heading, which was earning a living as an author illustrator. So I have got my book because I've got a workbook and journal out, which is a non-fiction one, and that has the potential there. And in fact, I want to hark back just briefly to what you were talking about in terms of advocating for creative people, and coming from a change and project management background and being a serial solo business owner, I'll just say, the business side often escapes people who are involved in the creative process. So having something as practical as how do I set up as a sole trainer, the copyright agency, mentoring workshops, all those kind of things, and how to apply for grants, etc., is a really critical thing for creatives to get involved in. We often have people say, oh, but I don't want to do the marketing, etc., but it is part of writing and publishing a book, and also having your business hat on is equally as important.
Absolutely, Veronica. I think that for many, many authors and illustrators, you're a creative person. That is where your focus is, and that is where your rich talents lie. And I think that many times those people forget that they are also running a small business. Or maybe not forget, but actually it's not necessarily where their interest lies.
Yes.
And it's really hard on authors and illustrators because the range of skills that you're required to have today to earn a living is very, very broad. You do need, I like what you said before about, putting your business hat on. We encourage our members all the time, for example, when they're negotiating their publishing agreements, to put a business hat on and regard yourself as your own small business. Yes. And I think it can be so exhausting writing a book. I mean, it's such a demanding and time-consuming and arduous thing to do. And so few of us can manage it. It's a huge achievement to write a book. I think at the end of that process, you can turn around and think, okay, right, now I have to sort of change lanes and think a little bit differently. So we, as part of our professional development program, we run some courses about your creative business with a focus on exactly this. What is the business of being an author? How do you earn a living? And those courses are popular because, if you're just alone, writing in your spare room, in your home or on the kitchen table, it's really, really hard how to know how to begin. And so much of what you do up front really determines your commercial return downstream.
Yes, yeah.
So we really do encourage authors and illustrators to try and equip themselves with some skills at the outset. One of my key pieces of advice to any author is when you finish writing your manuscript, even though you're desperately keen to see your work published the next day, because it's been
or that night.
That's right. It's been so long getting to the point. Don't rush. Don't rush, because you need to refine your pitch. You need to understand who you want to pitch to and get it absolutely right. Publishing, unfortunately, is such a one bite at the cherry kind of game. And then if you're lucky and you're offered publication, take the time to read your contract. It really surprises me how many authors just sign their contracts, I think, in the excitement of getting an offer. Understandable. You just want to drink champagne and sign on the dotted
I've got it.
But actually, you know, getting some advice on the contract and understanding what you're signing is important, because publishing agreements last for a very, very long time, and it's hard to renegotiate them down the track. It's better to make sure that you're being offered industry standard royalties, for example, and have you negotiated rising royalties just in case your work happens to be a runaway success? And are there circumstances where you can get your rights back if the publisher really has lost all commercial interest in the book? So you want to make sure you're positioning yourself well and thinking with a business mind if it's your intention to build a career. And then, as we know, the difficulty really for writing careers is the time. It's building that backlist and writing again and again. There are very few authors who sort of, you know, can retire from book one.
On the royalties, yes.
You've brought up so many amazing points, and the one thing that strikes me so far is, you know, all of this information that's on your website is so important, because you're absolutely right. As far as you know, being a writer myself and someone who always wants to put the business hat on, but and have at times, but sometimes we do, as I guess artists or any artists or anybody sort of, you know, trying to bridge that divide between creativity and business, we have to be dragged kicking and screaming to attend to those business things, those crossing the I's and dotting the T's. So, but one of the reasons I think we do have to be dragged kicking and screaming is because it's kind of being like lost at sea, because when you've put down the pen or put down whatever the project and start to look at the practical side of things, the information out there of what to do can be so overwhelming and so contradictory, and to the point where it becomes disheartening to go, okay, I really wanted to look into this, but the research I've done tells me 10 different things, and it's got more confusing than at the start. But knowing that, you know, we can go to ASA website and just get all this information and be so confident that information is correct, it is relevant to the current times, the current industry, is an absolute godsend. And I think really, I can't believe I didn't really have a greater awareness of it earlier. But I did want to ask one question, Olivia, in regards to what you mentioned before. So, for example, that excitement of signing a contract, you know, that you want to pop the champagne and maybe not worry about the fine print. But I wonder, for authors out there that are going to be lucky enough to find themselves in a position to be offered a contract, I always feel like there's some sort of fear, in the sense of, even if you do see something that doesn't quite sit right, there's that natural fear that any chance to renegotiate an offer may cause that door to be slammed shut instead. And so, in your professional opinion or experience, do authors, by the time if a publishing contract is offered, is there room to negotiate, or is it really a case of the publishing company does have that, you know, ultimately the lion's share of the power there, and can just as easily close the door should you raise any concerns?
Look, while it is true that publishers have very strong bargaining positions, that, you know, let's be frank, they hold all the cards because they are the gatekeepers, and publishing is so fiercely competitive. Whilst that's true, it is also absolutely true that there is room for negotiation. In the entire time I've been at the ASA, I have never once seen a publisher pull an offer because an author has negotiated. And in fact,
that's great.
Yeah. In fact, many publishers actively say to their authors, of course, you should go and get some independent advice on this contract. And I actively encourage authors to think about it, to get advice, to come back to them. So I think publishers completely understand and accept that there may well be negotiation. And so I think provided that you go about your negotiation professionally and politely and reasonably, you will never lose the interest of a publisher just because you've raised points to negotiate. And certainly if you don't understand elements of your publishing agreement, you should feel free to raise questions and to ask, and publishers will be really willing to talk you through, as they should, because it's really important that both parties have shared understanding of what you're signing, of what you're agreeing to. And there will be clauses in the contract that inevitably will be drafted in the publisher's favour, merely by virtue of the fact that the publisher has drafted the contract.
They drew it up, yeah.
Yes.
But you mentioned it's just it is a case sometimes of one chance of a bite of the cherry, and I sometimes it feels like, you know, any sort of offer where it feels like you're finally getting an in to the other side. And so I think it's a human condition to think, well, look, whatever it takes to get in, we'll just get in, and then we can, you know, work things out after that. But, you know, that first offer might feel like, yes, I'm finally can break through to this elusive other world. So who cares what the contract is? The main thing is get in and then sort things out. But it's so nice to hear that, no, we shouldn't do that. And publishing companies aren't there to take advantage of that, you know, to a certain degree. And that an offer that you just said you've never seen an offer withdrawn just because of renegotiation. So I think that's such a powerful message to send out to authors that, you know, will or eventually find themselves looking at a contract.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you're unlikely to get everything on your wish list, but I think a good tactic for negotiating when it comes to your publishing agreement is to have clear in your own mind what are the non-negotiables, if there is something to you. Like, for example, it might be an absolute non-negotiable to not assign your copyright, not transfer your copyright. The vast majority of contracts in the publishing industry, you're asked to license the publisher. And so at the ASA, you know, we always encourage authors, always hang on to your copyright, and that would be considered to be completely standard. So that might be a non-negotiable. And then there might be some nice to haves as well. And, you know, you can rank the issues that you want to negotiate on in order of importance and see where you end up. But I am sometimes surprised when I hear back from authors who've negotiated with publishers who've said, I didn't really feel comfortable with their option clause, the clause that gives the publisher the first right of refusal over the next manuscript written by that author. And, you know, publishers will sometimes really readily just take that clause out of the contract. So there are things that I think they will bend on. And the tip, like, is so obvious and applies in all aspects of our professional life, is just to negotiate with professionalism and courtesy.
Absolutely.
And it never hurts to ask, is what I've always felt in negotiations.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
sorry, Veronica.
I was going to ask you, in the 5 years that you've been at the ASA, what are the biggest changes that you've noticed about the publishing industry?
Well, one of the biggest would be the growth in self-publishing. There has been a huge uptick in questions that we receive about self-publishing, which encompasses a broader range now of publishing than ever before, I think. We now refer to it as author-funded publishing, which includes various models where you have a publishing service provider and you pay them a fee to make your book, or even where you have hybrid arrangements where a publisher might look for a financial contribution from the author, or even those arrangements where a publisher might say to an author, I'll publish your book, but I want you to purchase upfront 200 copies of your book, really as a way of underwriting that publisher's first initial print run. So there are various models, but the term that we've started to use is author-funded publication. That has grown a lot, and it's an area where we've been concerned, actually, because there's such a range of companies that exist, from excellent, able to produce a work that is indistinguishable from a traditionally published book, right through to operators predominantly overseas who I think exploit the intense desire that many authors have to be published, and whose business models really are based on making money out of authors rather than money out of book sales. So that's been one of the biggest changes, and I think self-publishing is fascinating because it represents at once both an opportunity and a new pathway to market and a risk, a new sort of financial risk that authors previously haven't had to handle. And when we were talking before about authors being small businesses, I mean, never is that more the case when you are actually your own publisher as well.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. So do you think that the ASA has been able to keep pace with those changes? Because I know you've got a lot of things on the website that are applicable for author-funded publishers, but are there some specific things that you think really help those authors?
Look, it's an ongoing challenge, Veronica. Things are happening so rapidly. We are keeping pace, I think, but we're just constantly having to review new players in the market and new developments. One of the very latest developments is that Amazon has announced it has a print facility now in Western Sydney, I think. And that is a game changer, I think, for an author self-publishing via Amazon, because for the first time they'll be able to have their books printed locally. Prior to that announcement, a self-published author would rely on Ingram Spark to print locally for their print on demand. So that's been a new development. I think if you are considering self-publishing, the biggest thing to know is that you have to do some real due diligence first, so that you don't lose a lot of money. Because a lot of the authors that we hear from who've self-published their work are those, I mean, I think we get a disproportionate number of the negative stories because people ring in a lot of trouble, in a whole lot of strife, and have found themselves in a situation which it's hard to get out of, and it's hard to revive a book once, you know, it's been launched onto the market, particularly if it's been launched very, very poorly. So my big advice would be do all your homework first and know your readership before you begin, because if you know who reads your books, then you know where they shop and therefore where your books need to be available. And you also know in what format they read. It's so much easier to self-publish in ebook format than print format because you don't have to worry about the print costs. So, you know, if you were a genre fiction writer, then self-publishing, I think, makes a lot more sense than if you were wanting to produce a beautiful cookbook with high-end photography and food style, you know, that sort of book is expensive to make, or a beautiful children's picture book, very expensive to produce and print. So depending on what you're writing and who your readership is, all your decisions will flow from knowing that reader and knowing where in the market your work sits. So even more than ever, you need to have a publisher mindset going in.
And I hate to bring a little bit of sarcasm, but the irony here in Australia at the moment is when you're printing, as in physical copies of your book, it's funny that we still consider it quite expensive, the process. However, in some instances, posting that book costs more than what it costs to actually produce that book.
Yes.
So but you have to be aware of the weight of your final product as well.
Exactly, yeah. So reduce your line spacing. All of those things are very important.
Yeah, and all of those things are not what you have to worry about if you've got traditional distribution through
bookstores. They'll do all that worrying for you. Indeed.
Now, I've got a quick question regarding you know, some of these resources we're talking about. So when it comes to your, you know, the Australian Society of Authors and the website and all of the information and programs and educational options there, What would you say with regards to the resources that are available? What would you say are a couple of the top ones that you believe, say, new or even existing writers may not be aware of? Like what sort of packages or advice or practical guidance is something that maybe we do overlook as far as writers that maybe, yeah, what would you say would be the top ones off the top of your head?
Look, I would definitely mention our FAQs because we've recently refreshed them.
They are fabulous. Yep.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Well, I hope that they're useful and they're obviously available to anyone because they're just posted there on our website for anyone to see. So I think they are really worth a look at, particularly for all the entry-level questions, and also because they give some good pointers for further information where you need to delve deeper. I'd also like to mention a new resource that we have just recently launched. It's called More Than Words, Writing Indigenous Culture and Copyright in Australia. And it is a guide for writers who might be writing about Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander culture or heritage. So for example, if you in your book have an Aboriginal character, or if you are interviewing Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people, elders, for example, or if you are writing about traditional stories, then it's really important that you understand the protocols around community consultation and consent, and also attribution and acknowledgement. So we've just recently launched this new updated guide. It's available for free for any ASA member from our website.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I think it is a very practical and helpful guide about what the process is for consent and when you should be thinking about it and when you should be contacting community and good places to start. So that is a new guide that I think is incredibly useful. And look, I can't resist saying stay tuned. Because
do that. That's
you are a writer at heart. in the upcoming sequel.
We do later this year have plans to issue some more ASA guides around getting published, around book contracts, and around building your author brand and promoting your work. So there's a lot in the pipeline and a lot to come. There's some great resources on the website and some great planned for later in the year as well.
Well, you've
Fantastic.
definitely sold me. I'm becoming a member 100%. And I think there's going to be a lot of people listening to this podcast that are going to, and visiting the show notes that are going to jump on for the details, of course, for the website we'll give later, who will also be looking at becoming a member without a doubt. So one question I do have, hoping you could just clarify for myself and for the listeners. So when we go to sign up to become a member, I noticed there's a full membership and associate membership. And I'm wondering if you could just let us know the difference between the two and which one would be the best one for most writers.
Sure. So full membership is for a published author. If you have published work, then that's the membership for you. And associate membership is for a aspiring author who is not yet published. So that's the only distinction.
Okay, and just to clarify for all of our listeners, so when you say published, so essentially any author who has a book for sale would be considered published, or like so across the whole spectrum of all different publishing platforms?
Yes.
Oh, beautiful.
Right.
So the other thing, of course, that ASA has is a number of partnerships. So in particular, and this is the one that got me to sign up some time ago, was the partnership with Ingram Spark. And, as an ASA member, you get the free title set up and a number of things, which, as they were the only print on demand in Australia, was pretty fantastic. So what other partnerships do the ASA have under their umbrella at the moment?
Well, we've actually just wrapped up. The Ingram Spark partnership is wonderful. Ingram Spark is incredibly transparent and helpful to indie authors. So yes, that's just a little discount you get if you're an ASA member. Mm-hmm. We just wrapped up a wonderful partnership with the law firm Banky Haddock Fiora. They were offering pro bono legal advice to authors for advice on contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've just wrapped that up, and we'll announce the new iteration of our contract assessment service shortly. I guess it's not a formal partnership, but we do have wonderful relationships with all of the state writers' centres. So I think the writers' centres do an amazing job. They will nurture writers and offer so many. They also have wonderful professional development programs. They have great workshops.
Yeah.
And I know that some of the writers' centres are also now offering mentorships as well. We also have a mentorship program. I think I mentioned that earlier. And in fact, we've had some really good news on our website currently. Mary Lou Stevens, one of our members, is being featured.
Yes.
She did mentorship with the ASA, and she's just had her debut novel picked up by Harlequin HQ, HarperCollins, and that's been published in July. Her book, which is The Last of the Apple Blossom, I think.
Oh, well done.
Yes, that right. Correctly.
Yes, no, that is correct. And what a great news story that is.
Which is a great news story. So I think, getting involved in your local writers' centre, getting involved in the ASA, being in a writers' group, if you are embedded in the industry and connected, it really does, I think, improve your chances of being a successful author. You learn so much from your peers and colleagues. I think you're taken more and more seriously. The more involved you are, really, really helps. Authors do learn from each other a lot. So I'm not sure that, another partnership we have at the moment is for insurance. So if you are told that you need to have public liability insurance or professional indemnity insurance, if you're an ASA member, we've got a member discount with CoverForce. So that's really just a discount that you can get through CoverForce if you're an ASA member. And I can't off the top of my head, and the last partnership, sorry, I'm just struggling to remember them.
So we've sprung those on you, sorry.
No, that's okay. It's for distribution. So if you're a self-published author, print distribution is such a challenge. It's very, very difficult to pick up a distributor as an indie author. So we have an arrangement with John Reed Books, a distributor based in New South Wales, to distribute your print books to bookstores throughout Australia. And that's available to members of ASA.
Oh, wow. That's definitely something worth looking into.
So much. You just keep peeling back the layers of the onion, and there are many more beautiful layers underneath.
I've, if you don't mind, Olivia, I've just got a quick two-pronged question. One, I understand obviously you come from intellectual property background, and that was a rabbit hole I went down, I think just before the year 2000, a couple of ideas that I was hoping to get up and running. And it was at that point that I realized, wow, I had no idea how to even start when it came to intellectual property. It was nothing we'd learned about at school. If you came up with an invention, there was just no, I don't remember reading what you could do. So I was very interested, A, is that a world where you came across lots of really funky inventions when it came to intellectual property? But B, when it comes to, obviously copyright has been, it's quite a very important feature of a writer's business. And here in Australia, when it comes to copyright, I guess the opportunity to talk to someone with your experience is fantastic, because to clarify once and for all, if when it comes to copyright, once we have a digital version of our work, even if in a rough draft form, does that mean under Australian law it is copyrighted because it has a digital timestamp, or is that just a myth, or how does it work? Is there copyright something we actually have to go out and arrange, or is it something that is digitally implied by our work?
Darren, that is a question which, interestingly, I reckon we get every week.
I'm sorry to hear you with the same old.
So it's a really good question. Copyright protection is automatic. So you don't have to register your copyright. You don't have to mail your manuscript to yourself.
That was a good one. I heard of that one. Yeah.
To trigger protection, once you have materially expressed your work, so once you've written it down or typed it up, saved it into your computer, it is protected by law automatically. There's nothing that you have to do. So in fact, Copyright Council, who are the copyright experts in Australia, I was on their homepage the other day on their website, and it had in big bold letters, "Do I need to register my copyright?" And it made me laugh, because I think that is a really common understanding, which is actually not true. You don't need to register your copyright at all. It is a good practice once you've got your manuscript, when you're sharing it with anyone or sending it to anyone, it is a really good idea to put your name on it, to put a copyright notice, you know, the copyright symbol and your name and the year, because that is an indication that you are the copyright owner of the work. It's not mandatory, it's not required, but it's just a matter of good practice. I never worked in the world of patents, Darren, and I think that's where a lot of the really funky inventions are.
No doubt. I know mine was funky and it was destined to failure, so anyway.
Not to worry.
And I do apologise to Australia Post out there if we've uncovered your scheme of self-posting your manuscripts. I'm sure that worked out very well for many years.
Oh, not to worry. So I have to ask now, Olivia, are you prepared to tell us, what do you read? What's your favourite genre or fiction or non-fiction to read?
I love fiction. That is my first love. I do read non-fiction as well and try and read widely. I've been on a real run lately of young Australian female authors. I mean, not even really by design, but I just seem to have picked up a lot of books by Australian authors and a lot of debuts. I've recently read Sorrow and Bliss and A Lonely Girl is a Dangerous Thing by Jessie Tu, and what was it by Jessica Detman? This has been absolutely lovely, I think it is. So I've read a real string of wonderful young Australian women authors. But yes, I tend to read fiction and occasionally non-fiction as well.
Very good. Oh, well, we're happy to allow that, particularly as you've been reading Australian authors. Fantastic.
You know, Veronica, since I've worked at the ASA, I really have been so much more aware of reading Australian. And I think when I speak to friends and I say to them, support Australian authors, you know, be aware of buying Australian books and buying Australian stories. So many of my friends will say, I never even really think of that.
Yes.
But I think that the average Australian consumer is very amenable, I think, to supporting local and reading Australian stories. And it's one thing I'm really passionate about, telling people to get behind our local industry. It will only continue and it will only thrive if it has the support of readers. So yes, it's good to practice what I preach.
Definitely. And of course, as Australian book lovers, that is absolutely why we are here, because we had an absolute dream of getting as many Australian authors in a single spot as we could. So we have traditionally published, we have the whole range of author-funded publishers, you know, small press, large, the publishing, you know, the big four. We have authors from everywhere in, you know, every genre. We're adding new pages as we go. And so many people have said exactly that when I say, you know, read Australian, they go, well, where do you find them? And that was the problem that, you know, Darren and I were having, was we'd love to support them, but it's hard. You can't type in Australian author on, say, Amazon. It just doesn't return what you want to see. So we are very happy to know that we are not the only ones, and I know we're not, but that you are out there promoting Aussie authors as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, for everyone out there, it's a case of, I think a lot of people, if you say, oh, do you support Australian authors? It may be a similar thing. Can I find it? Or is there really a big range out there? And to the point of, I think there is just blockbusters of every type you can imagine out there by Australian authors. And it's not like, oh, do I have to read about that sheep shearer? It's like, no. So I think sometimes when I talk to, you know, people in my circles and stuff, sometimes I think that's the impression I get from them. They think, oh, I never really thought that there's every genre possible by fantastic authors. And there's going to be a whole heap more, especially with the work that you're doing there, Olivia, and all the wisdom and the practical tools that you're offering, there's going to be, I'm no doubt there's going to be a huge flood of brand new authors coming out ready to take over the world. And hopefully a lot of it's going to be thanks to all of the wonderful advice that you're able to give and all the wonderful features of the website and the organisation in general.
Yeah, and do you know, I think there's a lot of Australian authors featuring on the bestseller lists at the moment. We've had a great year for Australian authors. And yeah, thank you, Darren and Veronica, for your podcast supporting Australian books, because surely I really think we're so beyond the cultural cringe now. There's such a fine Australian publishing industry here that it is utterly world-class and worth supporting.
Yeah, and I'm going to say post-COVID, well, I don't know if there's going to be post-COVID, but now that we're emerging from the shock of the pandemic, and obviously we're going to have to adjust moving forward, but I think Australia, from a global side of things, especially from creativity, I think we're going to become the global leader. And I think a lot of the world will start looking over here with envy and are going to want to tap this wonderful ball of creativity we've got. And obviously we're going to have a lot of people wanting to come over and live. I think that Australia's time has come. And I know when you say cringe, it is something in our society a little bit that we're guilty of, isn't it? And I don't know how to explain it, but I think the cringe time is almost over. I think we're about to emerge as the leaders in creativity. That's my personal belief, but I'll be betting my money on it.
Well, I think they're keeping us very busy. Anyone else want to pony up with
my 40 cents?
That's all right. Olivia, any final words before we ask you for all your social connections?
Just thank you so much for having me today. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you both. I was speaking to my book club recently, and I was asking them, how do you choose books? Like, how do you hear about books that you want to read next? And one of the overwhelming answers was podcasts. That actually podcasts are a rich source of recommendations for Australian books.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And I think it's true. I love podcasts myself. So thank you. I've never been on a podcast before. Thanks for having me.
No, wow. Worries at all. Then it is definitely our honour. Thank you so much.
That is lovely. And good to hear. Definitely good to hear. Excuse my little doggy in the background there. She's decided that she's had enough of me recording. Olivia, can you tell us where to find the Australian Society of Authors online?
Yes, we are at www.asauthors.org. And you can also find us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram.
Very good. All the great places where authors congregate and readers follow authors to find their next great read. Olivia Lanchester, thank you so much for your time. It has been incredibly informative, entertaining as well, and I really appreciate your generosity in squeezing us into what I am sure is a really busy day. With that small team, every minute will be counting, so thank you so much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Olivia. You are absolutely amazing. All the work yourself and your organisation is doing is absolutely amazing. And I'm sure that the future for Australian writers and the future of Australian book releases is going to be absolutely amazing. Also, thanks to all the work you're doing. So thank you so much. And thank you for being part of the podcast today.
Thanks, Darren.
And thank you, everybody. We will say bye for now.
Yeah, and indeed do. And please, if you didn't get a chance to jot down any of that information, jump onto the show notes where you'll find links to all of the wonderful sites that we just mentioned. And of course, go and sign yourself up, become a member of the Australian Society of Authors and change your literary world.
Let's meet again when magic happens.
Australian Book Lovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.